Ready? Could you please turn my mic on this time? Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Please make your way to your seats as we're about to get started. I hope we had a good lunch. That's kind of like a rhetorical question because I know the lunch was good. It was a really good lunch. Good luck to the next speakers to try to keep the energy up because we know what happens after a fat lunch. No pressure at all, no pressure. This is track 3 here at Radiodays Europe, just in case you're wondering what room you're in. We've had some amazing conversations so far this morning, and there are like so much more to come. In the meantime, before we get into it, how about we show you a recap of what has gone down here at Radiodays Europe so far?
Ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren.
Oh my goodness, Peter is just the guy. That was amazing. Peter is just the guy to make a meme off. Don't tell him I said so. And if I don't, if I don't take these words from our sponsors as well, I will get in trouble with Peter. So I want to say a big shout out to our gold sponsors, RCS, David Systems, Radio Player, and Xperi. Thank you very much for letting all of this happen. Our silver sponsors as well, Pure Jingles, Radio Analyzer, Radio Intelligence, Stream Monkey, Triton Digital, and XPLR. Shout out to you. And we won't forget our bronze sponsors as well, Lawo, Music Master, Neo Group, Radio DNS, Radio Zit, and Zebr. I think that is a German word I'm not sure I pronounced well. Hope I don't get in trouble for that. Anyway, enough of me. I know I've got some main character energy. But I am not the most important person here. Our speakers, however, who I'll be welcoming up on stage, are the most important people at the moment. Please put your hands together for Martin, Simon, Selina. I'm trying to get their names off my head right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the right session if you want to get rid of your lunch really quickly in a good way. This will be fun and full of energy. I'm really looking forward to this. Welcome to podcast 2.0, how formats become shows, events, and successes. Welcome to our 3 guests here on the panel. There will be time for questions afterwards or later on in this session. So if a question pops up, keep it in your head, hold tight to it, and give it to us in a few minutes. First of all, I'd like to introduce our 3 guests here. Our first guest is Maria Lorenz-Bokelberg, who is no stranger to the podcast world at all. She's running one of the biggest podcast companies in Europe and has a bright overview of particularly the German podcast market, and we're looking forward to seeing a few insights into how to become also a business and a success on that from her point of view. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you.
On the very right is Philipp Kurz. He's running a lot of things at Bayerischer Rundfunk, but he's also looking after making a podcast an event, which is far more than putting people on stage who just read something to you or who just talk. And we'll see a bit more about that with a true crime podcast from Bayerischer Rundfunk in just a few moments. So welcome, Philipp. And last but definitely not least is Selina. She's coming from Hessischerr Rundfunk, a public broadcaster somewhere in the middle of Germany. And Selina is responsible for one of the strangest podcast formats you probably come across, and that's exactly why she's sitting here. We'll learn all about it in a few minutes. She's the editor, manager, not the host, but the person who is the go-to person for the 5 Minutes Harry podcast. And what that is and how it works and why I personally find it one of the strangest but best formats that there is, we're going to learn in just about a few minutes. Welcome, Selina. We're actually going to start with Selina, and I've already given away a little bit about the podcast. Going to see a little movie about what it is. It's going to be in German, but Selina, for the people who are international, who are not from Germany, and maybe for the Germans also who don't know the format, can you please try and explain what the 5-Minute Harry podcast actually is?
Yes, I will try to. So the 5-Minute Harry podcast is literally about 5 minutes of the first Harry Potter movie, and our host, Cold Mirror, or as we call her, Cuddy, she analyzes every frame of each 5-minute sequences of the first Harry Potter movie. And she has been doing this for 8 years, 30 episodes. Each episode is roughly about 1 hour, some a bit longer, some a bit shorter. And she has a very huge audience with this content.
Now, just to give you that, 5 minutes of the first Harry Potter movie, thank goodness there are 8 of them, and it takes her 1 hour to talk about this. It is one of the most successful podcasts in Germany, right? Just so you know what we're talking about here. Maybe we show the film, or you want to explain first?
Yes, we will just have a peek at the last episode that aired, so you can hear her voice and kind of get like a vibe of her.
Yeah,
and
even
in
if
the
you
beginning, she talks about what the podcast is used in what context. So like nannying a child, writing a bachelor's thesis, tidying up your room, these things. Yeah.
Even if you don't speak German, you still get the vibe and the gist of how she actually speaks, which is quite unique as well. If you could please run the film.
Willkommen zu 5 Minuten und 36 Sekunden Harry Podcast. Ein Podcast von und mit mir, Cold Mirror, in dem ich sonst in jeder Folge 5 Minuten aus dem Film Harry Potter und der Stein der Weisen detailreich Frame für Frame analysiere und das mit Fun Facts vollballer. In dieser ganz speziellen Podcast-Folge kommen jedoch als kleines Schmankerl nochmal 36 Bonussekunden dazu. Dieser Podcast ist gedacht zum Erinnern, zum Kichern, zum Einschlafen, zum Wachbleiben, zum Badezimmer aufräumen, zum Hühnereingeweide einkochen, zum Grippe auskurieren, zum Kuchenbacken, zum Überbrücken von beschissenen Tagen oder zum Aufwerten von guten Tagen, zum Ausdauerlaufen, zum in der Sonne schwitzen, zum die Illusion von Beständigkeit aufrechterhalten, zum Ablenken bei einer Weisheitszahn-OP, zum Ignorieren von Hausaufgaben, zum Pferdekoppel abmisten, zum Papiermüll falten, zum in der Badewanne liegen, zum Cosplay-Kostüme nähen, zum Kaninchengehege putzen, zum Bauspardokumente einscannen, zum Babysocken stricken, zum Achterbahnschlangen, Wartezeit überbrücken. Im Idealfall alles gleichzeitig auf einmal. Und jetzt wünsche ich viel Vergnügen bei Folge 30. Wir beginnen in dieser Folge beim Grüppchen halbherzig klatschender Gryffindors und enden beim Anfang. Das Gewinnspiel um den Hogwarts-Hauspokal ist im vollen Gange, denn mit Fleiß und guten Taten hat dieser Preis, wie wir mittlerweile wissen, wenig zu tun. Man muss einfach Glück mit dem Lehrer haben und darauf hoffen, dass der einen guten Tag hat. Dann kann man ein paar Punkte für sein Haus abknapsen. Diese werden nämlich willkürlich vergeben, ohne einheitliches, durchblickbares oder irgendwie vorher mit den Schülern kommuniziertes System. Und selbst wenn du denkst, du hast alles richtig gemacht und hast den Hauspokal-Sieg in der Tasche, kommt der Schulleiter höchst selbst, reißt dir das Herz aus der Brust und tritt darauf vor allen Leuten. Du wirst in dieser Schule konstant immer und immer wieder verarscht. Das Gefühl habe ich zumindest, wenn ich die folgenden Szenen betrachte.
So it's interesting because you can tell who's German from the people who are laughing. And you can also tell that about 80% of you don't think, what the heck is going on here? So there you go.
Yes. So Cold Mirror is a very prominent YouTube figure in Germany. She was the first big YouTube star in Germany, and actually her first viral content was also about Harry Potter. In fact, she did a German synchronization of, well, different Harry Potter movies about the first, the second, and the fourth, and also like in full length, so 1.5 hours of the original movie, but dubbed with a completely different context, in where she makes fun of the characters and the theme of the Harry Potter world, but in a very loving way, because she's a big fan. and that's where she grew her audience. And so Harry Potter fans are one of her biggest community members. And yeah, her podcast is just a great representation of how you can make the love about a specific topic, which can sometimes be very niche, because although Harry Potter is a big community, she goes into very absurd details. So each episode is just a journey of her Googling stuff, researching things, reading through Wikipedia articles, and giving you very random facts and unuseful information sometimes, but very entertaining.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a super successful thing, and what fascinated me about it is, as someone who works in podcasting as well, if you get this as a pitch, if someone tells you, I have an idea for a podcast, I'm going to talk for 1 hour about 5 minutes of film, I'm going to do it in a very particular way, and I'm going to give a lot of details, and it's going to be really fun, it's going to be a huge success, I'm not buying this. And I'm surprised someone did, but it is a massive success and is highly entertaining. It's actually a reason to learn German if you don't speak German already. So it's super entertaining, super fun. I know a lot of people who love the podcast. My kids love that podcast. And the thing is, how did you pitch it? Or how did it come about that actually someone said, this is so, excuse me, crazy, we believe this will work? How did that come about?
So when she first started doing the podcast, she did it independently on her YouTube channel. And in 2017, Funk was established. So it's a content network from the public broadcast media, but for a younger audience between, I think, 13 and 29 is the range. And she was one of the first YouTubers in that network. And so she already had established the format, and it was already successful, so they just welcomed her in the network. So she kind of didn't have to pitch it. But yeah, she actually got the idea for the podcast of a similar format. It's a podcast about Back to the Future, and they are analyzing 1 minute of the movie. So.
What do you think is it such a success? Why do you personally, as someone who works with it so closely, why do you think so many people love this podcast?
So I think the idea in itself is very unique, but also our host is very unique. She's a person who's known for her authenticity because she just made her content independently for such a long time without ever trying to monetize it. And luckily she was able to join the public broadcast network and make money with her content, but yeah, she never used ads or anything. And I think a lot of people grew up with her because she was huge when people were younger. And they love her for the way she talks and thinks and connects topics that seem to have nothing in common at all, but she somehow spots similarities or just tiny details that you would have never spotted, even if you have watched the movie multiple times. And it's just a very unique way of researching topics.
Absolutely is. Philipp, you're doing something completely different, but something that is taking a podcast completely into the next level, which is you're making a true crime, not a true crime podcast, but the true crime podcast from Bayerischer Rundfunk. You're making this into an event. How did that come about? Why are you doing that?
This is a long story. Long years ago, we decided to relaunch our radio brand Bayern 3, and we decided on 2015 to rebuild it as a 360 entertainment brand. Everything has to pay off for the brand, and so we decided to create all our audio things, our online social media things, and our events. And then we decided, or we said, what's not to do on this level. we decided to establish an event and not a live podcast. Due to this old decision to build a 360 entertainment brand. So first of all, we had to decide what's not to do. We don't want to make a live podcast. We decided to do a real show.
Okay. But it is, after all, a live podcast still. Is it not?
No, it isn't.
No? It's a show.
No, it isn't. It's really a standalone show.
Okay.
Different stories, different topics. It's the same. It's the same thing, but it's different. The themes, the topics, the stories are different from the podcast.
Okay. So I see. So I think it's time to have a look how you do it. We will see that it's not doing a podcast on stage, but a very
That's the reason. It's not a podcast on stage.
It's a different approach. If you could please run the film.
Triggerwarnung.
Einige Menschen können auf entsprechende Szenen sensibel reagieren.
Hello, 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 Mädchen!
Leila schreit und versucht, sich in die Wohnung zu retten, doch keine Chance. Er stürzt hinterher und sticht wie besessen auf sie ein.
Und plötzlich war das Erbe wieder im Spiel. Indiz Nummer 2 und mit ihr größtes Problem, wir haben es gerade im Urteil ja auch schon gelesen, Henrike hatte kein Alibi.
Und zum einen haben wir eine unmittelbare Tatzeugin, diese Nachbarin, aber auch eine Tatwaffe, das Tatmesser, an dem sich nicht nur Leilas Blut befand, sondern auch DNA-Spuren und Fingerabdrücke von Dennis.
Und wer denkt, dass Tinder-Max was damit zu tun hat?
Liebe Jackie, du scheidest als Täterin schon mal definitiv aus.
Hör zu, jetzt zieht's!
War super schön, auch die beiden mal live zu sehen.
Mein erstes Mal, aber mega, mega, mega cool. Ja, ich glaube, ich habe ziemlich oft sehr laut geschrien.
True Crime.
So explain to us a little, there is a true crime podcast, and there are these two who are also the hosts of the podcast, but on stage they do different things. Or it's more a show than a podcast only.
It's much more show than the podcast, and this was one of the first steps we did. We decided not to produce it on our own. We had to look after a company that is especially for a stage show, and that's not our profession. Our profession is audio. Our profession is event, such as a concert. But the stage show with several things on stage, with all these things we had to build, it's not our profession. So the first step was to find a company helping us. It's at the end of the day a kind of cooperation model with a company who's running a lot of stage shows. And then we had our invest to write all the storylines, the plot, the story plot. But really different from the podcast. The podcast is a standalone product, and the show is a standalone product.
So you had specialists that you brought in to do the show on stage?
To do the show, to do the choreography on the show, on the stage, to build together with us all the elements, especially for a stage show. And back to my first sentence, there was a decision not to do a live podcast. Yeah? The decision was to do a real show on stage. And there are much more things necessary for a show than for a podcast production.
I imagine that costs a lot of money to do that, and probably not every podcaster can do it. And also I've seen there are a lot of people attending it. How did you, well, I think my questions is two questions. One is, how did you get all these people to come? And my other question is it worth it from a financial aspect? Like, do you make more money with it than what you put in?
This is not our first goal as public broadcaster to earn as much as money. That's not our first goal to do this, but you're able to earn money with it, yes. At the end of the day, it's a kind of cooperation model with this company who's running the stage show, and it's a kind of licensing model. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our brand is Bayern 3. Our brand is a true crime podcast, Bayern 3. And we had a license model with this company who's running the stage show. Yes, they are able to earn money and will participate above the license fee.
Yeah.
And we do need, I think this is part of your question, around about 500 people per show. Mm-hmm. So the show is on a good way. And meanwhile, there are shows all over Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And we had shows with more than 5,000 people in Berlin and Munich. So it works.
So as we talk about business, this is finally the point where you have to come in. Do you think, because you're running a podcast company, this, like Philipp is in a public broadcaster's environment, which has a completely different setup. And Selina works for a public broadcaster. You actually own your own podcast company, which is very big and successful. Is this a model where you think this is something where more podcasters could and probably should go from your perspective in the event show area?
Yeah, I find it very interesting because I come from the live industry actually. I did booking before I did podcast, live booking. So I have a very big soft spot for everything on stage. And this event thing is also something like we do a lot of podcasts. We send a lot of podcasts on tour just the way like we do, but the podcast. So a simpler version. But we also talk about a lot of live opportunities and how can you make it different from the podcast so that the people that pay for it really get more than just the podcast. But I want to put the just in exclamation marks because people love also seeing just the podcast when they're a fan of the podcast because it's about being in the same room with the person that you usually just listen to and then afterwards maybe say hi and take photos and so. That is very important also for the podcasters. But I like the whole event idea. We are also playing around with it, especially with also true crime podcasts or more like where the podcasts already are more than just talking. Yeah.
I think this is the opportunity to reach more audience, not only this podcast fan base.
Yeah,
this is the opportunity to reach much more audience.
Yeah, sure, because usually the second person, every other person doesn't know what's happening on stage and just was like dragged along. So that also usually helps, yeah.
Yeah. Selina, do you think that would be the next thing for your podcast to do, to take Cold Mirror on stage and do the thing?
Well, the thing is, it would be so successful, but she is not a stage person. She doesn't really like talking in public. She only does interviews from her home, so I get that she doesn't want to go in this direction, but in theory, of course, she could do the podcast in a live way. She could partner up with Warner Brothers and launch like a big Harry Potter themed tour. So yeah.
But I mean, that's part of the truth when it comes to events and shows. You need people who want and can do the events and shows. And let's face it, not every podcaster looks the way that these two guys look, and a lot of podcasters don't want to go on stage. In fact, they prefer the privacy of a podcast. Maria, where else do you see the business going? We had this discussion in like away from events and shows now. We had this discussion on many levels. At one point, we said, okay, the honeymoon is kind of over in the podcasting world. Still, it's a business that's growing and maturing. What's your take on where podcasting stands and where it will go from here business-wise?
Yeah, first of all, me as a married person like my marriage now much more than I like the honeymoon. So this is something I'm looking forward to: stability, you know, knowing what you're doing and everyone is like in it and not just for the, I don't know, pink.
the thrill.
Yeah. So I think it's good actually that the honeymoon is over. And I actually see podcasts going everywhere the same as TV shows or radio shows or whatever is going anywhere. You know, I think live is the first logical consequence because it's people talking and people doing stuff in front of a microphone. So that's a logical thing to put that on stage. But I'm really looking forward for being more in the, like, for example, books or merchandising or the first podcast ride, theme park, whatever. I'm really looking forward to that. Also, event-wise too, but also like business-wise, because I think there's a lot of things to do in the periphery of podcast producing that there can be a lot more businesses. For example, I know people don't like that, but they're still gonna do it because in some things, like the peripheral stuff, the US is a bit ahead of us. And other things we kind of, we're there where they are now, but in these things like that you know what you have, you see your podcast, you reach an audience and you be much braver to be like, I'm gonna publish a book. I'm gonna make a nice merchandising stuff. I'm doing clothing. I'm just gonna cooperate with something like you do, because I really love that, by the way. I know the live event, and I really love it because it is exactly what I want to do. Put podcasts everywhere and take it seriously, and take it also as a serious form of storytelling, where you can make books, movies, TV shows from, because it can be silly, which is great, because I think we as a podcast industry are allowed to be much more silly than the other media, which is fine because it's a safe space for people. And but it also can be taken very seriously, and we can do great things with it. So yeah, everywhere. I want to ride. Podcast the ride.
Podcast the ride is good. It's good. Is it going up or going down? That's the interesting question. Talk about formats and things like this, and I think it's a smart idea to do a license deal with, for example, an event company. You don't have to pay for the stage and the lights and the sound and everything yourself. You kind of share the costs and the risks and everything with someone. I think that's really a point. Talk about formats. When I look at a particular format like the Harry podcast, are you sometimes bored by the normal formats that other podcasts do, and you want to see more crazy, silly, cold mirror stuff out there, or do you think it's just it's an orchid, it's something that's very particular, but the rest will be just as the rest is?
I think the podcast market could benefit from more crazy ideas, definitely. I think you can feel if a podcast is generated just in the brain of a person who has a good idea, or if it's curated by people who know the media, know the audience, and have a certain brand. I think both is also possible, like a combination of both. But I think sometimes the craziness it takes to launch a format that maybe wouldn't get a good pitch at somewhere else. It just takes some courage, but it's worth it.
Well, at some point I heard the phrase, the best way to kill a good idea is to take it into a meeting. So maybe it needs crazy people and less, stations, enterprises, companies, and just do a thing. But I'm sure it takes a while and a lot of courage to come up with a new format. Philipp, where do you think true crime, which is probably the format of podcasts, where do you think true crime goes next? Cinema, rides?
Maybe. We had. We tried to think about to produce a TV show about our stage show, but then we decided it probably would not work because the show on stage is completely different kind of entertainment as on TV or cinema. But why not next level? To think about the stories, to think about audience integration, to think about audience interaction, and then think about video production, whether if television, cinema, YouTube, something else. But it could be, yes, really.
And then you're in a lucky position that you have the TV station more or less in your house. I mean, it still costs money, but you are also a TV station.
So yes, we are, and we should talk, I think.
Yeah, that is. Are there any questions from the audience? I'm trying to see. Please raise your hand. Don't be shy. We're all friends here, most of us. Do I see a hand in the back? Yes. There's a lady in black in the back. Thank you. If you could briefly say who you are and where you're coming from, and then say your question, please.
Hello, my name is Cristiana. I'm from Romania. I work at the radio and also network podcasts. And I have a question for Selina. How do you track an existing podcast that has success in a network?
So I think the best thing in our case was to give the host a lot of creative freedom. So Cold Mirror basically does everything on her own. She produces on her own, edits and writes her scripts, comes up with the ideas, and we around it just try to support her by doing emails, support her by uploading the content, so all the management stuff, and then also, of course, giving her the space to come up with ideas. So I think you have to find a way to make the host or the creator comfortable in the network, and also show opportunities where you could, for example, collaborate or broaden something that the creator does itself.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's a lady, I guess, here in a... Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I'm Renata from Portugal, and I would like to know how do you monetize your podcasts, and what kind of formats of advertising do you have, if they are so creative as the content?
Well,
I'm probably the only one monetizing, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe I should answer that.
Well, the other two, just to explain.
I know.
Philipp is a public broadcaster, so he's financed by fees, and Selina has been independent first, so probably very poorly financed, and then got picked up by another public station who's now paying for everything. But Maria has her own company, so maybe she can answer that.
They have such a easy life. Not Maria, but you have an easy life.
Well, no.
I have the hardest life
It's
of
not
all
an
of
easy
us.
life. It's not an easy life, because the real art is to make sure that your concept does get picked up by someone like a public station and not change the concept. That's a big success, right? So you earn the money the other way around. It is one idea to have a great concept and then sell it to someone who will then eventually pay for it. But that's not all the answers, is it, Maria?
No.
What are the other answers then?
Yeah. I think we all have ups and downs, right? So what I would like to say first is that because we are talking about what can you do with your podcast, if you have a podcast, like can you make an event, can you go live, can you make a TV show or whatever, but I think you should never make a podcast with that in your mind, like actually I want it to be something else later. You should make the best podcast you can, because the audience will know, and if that is successful, then you should think about what else you can do with it. And to answer your question, how we monetize, we have different... First of all, I have a lot of clients paying me so that I produce their podcast. That is one thing. But when it comes to the podcast itself and the originals we make, we first take a look at what we have and what our audience is. If it's a podcast that feels very intimate, like it's a person that has a very close connection to their community, then we go advertising, of course, host ads and programmatic ads, but also we try to go to like Patreon, things like that, and let the community also take part in the monetization because they want to. because then they feel part of it. But if you do a podcast like that is more scripted and more like a news podcast or whatever, then it's difficult because you don't have that emotional connection to your audience. So then you will have to go to more monetarization through ads and through all kind of ads. I think we all grew up on host-read ads, and now it kind of goes to programmatic ads, so it feels a bit different. And also the golden times of, I don't know, 120 euros per 1,000 listeners is kind of over. So that was great. That was a great year. So it kind of shifts a bit, and I think what is very important that you know what you have, know who your audience is, and then also kind of come up with where can I go, who wants to support us. And you can also just go, I have a podcast about relationships, and then we go to a company who talks about stuff like that, and then we get together very much on a just you and me basis. So that's also possible with podcasts.
Generally speaking, I would say to make a podcast and start it on your own and try to refinance it through advertising is probably the hardest way to do it.
Absolutely. It is very hard, especially because it's growing and growing. I started when it felt like there were 40 podcasts. That was also easier, but now it's just a lot of podcasts, and you should really think about that. The cool thing is with the crazy ideas that I think the crazy ideas and the very brave ideas and the maybe a bit weird ideas are best to be had in podcasts, because you can still start on a very like low financial level to produce them. You know, you cannot do that with a TV show. It will be expensive from the first second. So this is also cool to use podcasts to try something new and try something crazy.
One of the biggest misunderstandings about podcasting in my book is that you think it's so easy to do, I'll just talk into the microphone and then a lot of people are going to love it and I'm going to get rich. That's not the way it works. It usually works with a good idea, with good collaboration, and with having a business thought about it as well. Who could this be interesting for? Who could be a good partner? Who could be a good event partner? Who could be interested in a slightly off format that is not middle of the road, two people talking, but one person talking, but completely different, or other stuff. You know, what's something unique that others might find interesting, and develop a business out of that. Because remember, nobody listens to your podcast just because you make it, unfortunately. Wouldn't it be great? There's a question here. I see a hand. Oh, there's one here. Okay, yeah, you go first. That's fine. That's fine. We have time for two. It's no problem.
Everyone is very polite.
The lady here in front, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you'll be next if you just raise
Hi, Laura doing DW. I'm interested in what do you do to discover the needs of your audiences when developing a new product?
What did Cold Mirror do to, I almost said Coldplay there. What did Cold Mirror do to discover the need of her audience?
I think she just did what she loved, but I actually have an answer for that, because we also produced a podcast basically about Cold Mirror. So the idea was, how can we generate more Cold Mirror content without giving her more workload, because her community always wanted more content. So we came up with a concept idea where we just ask her questions about random topics and basically let her talk and kind of support her in her craziness. It was called the Wir hören uns alle gegenseitig podcast, because that's what she always said at the end of the episodes. And so I actually hosted it with her and also generated the idea. So it was just knowing the need of the community and thinking about what can we do to generate the content without making it hard for the person who maybe doesn't have the capacity.
And then there's a lady in the back, and then we have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
Hi, my name is Claire McGinn from the BBC. Can I ask about the Harry Potter thing? Do you have to pay the company that owns the license for Harry Potter? Because with IP being such a valuable thing, I can't imagine if it's, with a successful podcast like this, that they wouldn't want to get something from it.
Yeah, so gladly we don't have to pay Warner Brothers. I think it's there's this German phrasing, if it's redaktionell eingebettet, if it's like editorially, if there's editorial value in content, you are allowed to use certain things. So in her podcast, she uses screenshots of the movie, but not the audio. And so I think that's like the gray way area to producing the content without licensing it. But back when she did the synchronizations of the movies on her own, she actually did have a problem, or got in a problem with Warner Brothers, and like her channel almost got deleted. So it was a big thing.
You're on the edge between quoting it, which is fine, or using it, which is payable, right? Do I see another really quick question or not? I don't. Oh, there is one. Sorry. There's one in the back. Congratulations. You're the last question for this session.
Yes. Okay.
Shoot.
Thanks. I'm Liss. I'm from Dutch Public Broadcasting. I make a podcast that's quite popular with a quite famous host, and we now lately also put it on YouTube, our podcast. And I was wondering if you had any experience with that or any advice, what really works on YouTube and also on a podcast.
So how do you YouTuberize your podcast? You went the other way. You went YouTube first and then podcast. So any thoughts on YouTube and podcast?
Yes, so it was a YouTube-only format, and now it's both. So it's on all platforms, basically. I think if you go the other way around, you just have to provide a reason to have like a visual add-on. So it's either that you can see the hosts, which can, depending on the situation, like do the hosts know each other and where are they? So that can be a good value to make video content too. Or it's something interactive, like showing comments or showing pictures of something. And so I think on YouTube there is this great feature that you can comment on stuff which you cannot if you're on Spotify or something else. So it's also a good way to bring in the audience and make them part of the content itself.
So I think it's safe to say that while podcasts are changing, they still have a bright future ahead of them and can serve audiences really well. But it's no longer enough to just open the microphone and talk. It needs far more than that. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much to Selina and Maria and Philipp, and have a good Radio Days 2024. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. See you in 15 minutes for the next one.